Okay.
All right, I'm told that the stream should be restarted, so maybe refresh the browser, see if it goes. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. Yep. No worries. So key components, ballot proposition language, which I'm not going to walk through here today. It's in the ordinance. 2/3 property tax goes to, or 2/3 goes to property tax diversification. 1/3 goes to the MAPS, municipal area projects. Put a lot of effort into safeguarding the tax cap. I know that's important to a lot of people. 7 calendar year sunset provision, which has been fairly controversial. It could be extended by going through this process again. But to me, that was pretty important to make sure that if this doesn't work out, we don't have to vote to remove it. It automatically removes itself. We put in numerous tax exemptions and a provision for hardship relief. We have the Citizens Advisory and Oversight Board and the Municipal Area Projects Tax Trust Fund. So let's go to projected revenue. Again, it's an estimate. There are many estimates out there. Just sticking with this one, which was developed by the University of Anchorage Center for Economic Development and then validated by the Institute of Social and Economic Research. If we want to change, we can change. It's a moot point to me. Just again, trying to be consistent for the process. So we all talk about the same numbers versus what number we're talking about now. These are also annual numbers, so per year. And as I said, the C is out. Have not had time to review that at this point. So let's go to property tax relief.
Great, and thank you. All right, so this is where we start going through some of the aspects of the ordinance. So I'll ask folks to turn to page 14 of the ordinance, and then I think we're going to go fairly sequentially from there. So the first of the two main pieces of this sales tax is the property tax relief and the diversification of property taxes. So 2% of that will go to the diversification. So that's approximately, based on all of the estimates, 160 million. If you do all of the math, that's approximately a 16% reduction in property tax. So going further down that math, it's roughly per 100,000, we're talking about $265 relief in property tax. And so on your average $450,000 home, that's $1,195 dollars in property tax relief. I think it's important to note technically that the reduction is based on actual prior year collection. So the way that the ordinance is crafted, mainly because we didn't want to use a sort of a projected estimate of what might be collected in sales taxes. We're going to collect a full year in sales taxes, let's say in 2026, and then in 2027, that full year's in sales taxes, that 2% of it will be used in 2027 for that property tax relief, just to keep everything aligned and not worry about going over or under projected estimates. Next slide, please.
Okay, real quick comment. Dean just pointed out I made a mistake in this. It's not 160 million, it's 120 million. So that's, yeah, sorry, just now caught that. Okay, MAP's projected revenue is 60 million, and from that comes the operating cost of the tax. Again, these are estimates from the administration. So 4 million is the 3% holdback that businesses can use for their implementation of the tax and administration. And then 4.7 was the number we had from the administration, which I think might be different now in the C. So we'll look to update that, netting roughly 50 million annually for the MAPS projects. Some of the key components of the MAPS project, if we will have the Citizen Advisory and Oversight Board, which we would come up with a better name and acronym for that, but it is what it is. Projects do not start until 80% funded, and the projects will include operation, maintenance, and safety improvements for the expected life of the project. And that's trying to fix some of the sins of the past. So when the PAC and Egan and others were built, that wasn't included. The Denina Center does have a mechanism to cover the operating cost. And with the Denina Center, we also resolved the Egan Center. The PAC still remains and has been discussed as possibly trying to include that and maybe others to fix some of those sins of the past. I'm going to run through the project list that is tentative. AEDC continues to work on the project list and the estimates for that project list. It is not final at this time. And this gets a little bit away from mechanics. So let's walk through the MAPS project. So in no particular order. Next slide. Indoor market and food hall. So I think those who have traveled are familiar with these. A place for an open air market, food vendors, farmers markets, and artisans be year round. Ship Creek Riverwalk and Entertainment District. The example I will put you to is Fort Wayne, Indiana, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Gathering Place, San Antonio Riverwalk. Those, of course, are very grandiose projects. We won't have the funding to get there day one, but maybe if this continues, we will get there. Next slide. Nordic Aquatic Center, facility to offer residents year-round entertainment and recreation space, including lap pool, children's features, jacuzzi, sauna, lazy river, and water slide. Point to McDonald Island, Alberta. 4-season trail facilities, 3 full-service facilities at Kincaid, Goose Lake, Chester Creek, including food and beverage services, outdoor equipment rentals, commercial space, and other site-specific amenities. Next slide. Downtown and arts and entertainment redevelopment, upgrade the Performing Arts Center, completely redo Town Square Park, and improve the pedestrian walking experience to the 4th Avenue Commercial and Mushing District. Chester Creek Sports Complex, revitalize the Chester Creek Sports Complex to include state-of-the-art facilities for hockey, baseball, and football, in addition to new land available for housing and commercial space. Anchorage Sports Center, a new indoor sports center, including basketball, tennis, pickleball, an indoor track, and open turf space located in East Anchorage. Next slide. Children's Museum, a facility offering exhibits and programs designed for children. Eagle River Sports and Recreation Facility, an indoor sports facility that includes soccer, basketball, flag football, and volleyball courts. Girdwood Arts and Recreation District, a space for art galleries, workshops, and dedicated camping and RV park in South Town Site. So some of these projects are, I'll say, much better fleshed out than others because of the organizations that have brought them forward and the support behind them. Others will need work. Let's go to the Citizen Oversight and Advisory Board. I need to add an RA to that so I can call it COBRA, but it is what it is. Okay, so this board, again, flexible, 7 members, 3-year term, appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the assembly. Purpose to review proposed and actual expenditures from the MAPS Tax Trust Fund and submit recommendations to the assembly and mayor regarding expenditures that will have the approval, the order of projects funded, and modifications to the list of tax exemptions which the assembly would approve. They would recommend appropriations for operations, maintenance, and security and safety for constructed and related improvements. So again, that fund to handle the ongoing cost of these sites. And some of these sites will have revenue associated with them as well. And then on an annual basis, they'll provide a report to the mayor and assembly on the status of the tax and any exemptions they recommend for addition, deletion, or change. And then moving on to exemptions.
Great. So for folks following along, this is starting on page 16, bottom of the page. Just generally before I go into it, so exemptions was a particularly important piece for me because I think, as we all know, sales taxes generally tend to be a bit more regressive in their nature. And so exemptions are a key component for us as the legislative body to do what we can to reduce the hardship on individuals, and particularly our low-income families and individuals. So there were a variety of questions and considerations made into this list. I think one of them to note before I go into it is, should this sales tax be added on to already existing taxes or not. So, for example, the bed tax, the marijuana tax, the alcohol tax, the motor fuels tax. And I think generally, except for that last one, I think the decision both by the coalition and committee and by the sponsors was that yes, we should add the sales tax onto those other taxes, except for the motor fuels tax, because that one I think is would be, I think, particularly too onerous if we added that, considering everyone how much of a vehicle city we are, and people need gas to get to work. So we didn't want to hurt people in that manner. So getting through that list now. So the exemptions include things like non-prepared foods, rent payments, licensed childcare and products, medical services, counseling, goods and prescriptions, gasoline or diesel fuel, financial services, transactions, business to business purchases, so wholesale items for resale, so Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about registering for sales tax and having to turn that into the city. No, thank you. Next slide. State and federal exemptions. There was also, I think, as stated earlier, we are only going to be taxing up to $1,000 of a purchase. So that's $30 is the max tax per transaction. Then incidental sales and purchases by a charitable organization, private parochial school, where proceeds go to the organization or mission. Then next slide. So this exemption modification. So I think it's important to know that the assembly by a majority may make formal recommendations or take recommendations from the MAP Citizen Advisory and Oversight Board to see if we need to change any of these exemptions after the fact. Of course, before the fact, this is going to be our first sort of bite at the apple to make any changes to exemptions. But after, let's say, this gets approved by the voters, there's still an opportunity through the Assembly, through the Citizen Advisory and Oversight Board, to make changes if we learn that something is particularly onerous. Next slide, please. Then hardship relief. This is an interesting one. And I think this is one that will need further ordinance in the future to actually implement. But so there will be future work for the Assembly and administration. But we envision some type of universal application process for households with incomes below the federal level of 80% poverty to be exempt from provisions of this sales tax. So that could get a little bit tricky in terms of the mechanics of it, but we put it in the ordinance as this is something that we want to achieve, and future ordinances, future work will achieve this. We don't exactly have the mechanics of how that would work in this ordinance. Next slide, please.
Okay, so moving on to the MAP Trust Fund, trying not to reinvent the wheel. So the trust fund shall be invested per an investment policy that's approved by the Assembly. The Board of Trustees shall be appointed by the mayor and serve 3-year terms, again, approved by the Assembly. Tax cap section. So tax cap, first, thank you to the administration, Mr. Falsey, Mr. Clouda, Mr. Gates, who had significant input into this. And we'll still have input as we continue to refine this to make sure that we protect the tax cap coming in and going out of a potential sales tax. This drives places property tax under the diversification under the tax cap and exempts the MAPS projects from the tax cap. Next slide. So input, you'll have input. We want the Assembly's input. We want the mayor's input. The Assembly, and I tried to capture the salient points here, approved board members, exemptions, project expenditures, hardship exemption. That's more of a deliverable, have to build and approve that. Trustee board and investment policy approval. The mayor, of course, next slide. The mayor, of course, will have, the administration will have implementation, board member appointments, trustee member appointments. Of course, PM&E is primarily on the hook to execute as well as purchasing to send out RFPs along with the execution. Okay, next slide. Almost done. So again, just remind us of the goals to revitalize Anchorage through the MAPS program, to reduce and diversify property taxes, and that's done through diversifying our tax base. So I will leave it there at the thank you. And if AEDC or the administration's here and would like to make any comments, they're welcome to come forward. If you want, you don't have to. Okay, don't
Yeah.
have to.
And actually, yeah, you don't have to make comments, but if there are administration folks, because I think we're about to get into Q&A, and today's work session, at least the remaining 18 minutes we have, oh no, we have more time, sorry. The remaining time that we have will go to some of the technical aspects. So if there are any administration folks who want to speak to some of those technical aspects, invite you to come up. Thank you, Nolan. That's it.
So I have myself in the queue for the first round of questions. Ms. Brawley second, Ms. Bonga next. I have so many questions. This project apparently is going to be requested to have its public hearing on 11/6, square in the middle of the budget season. So the statement was made, we want input. I don't know, it doesn't look like it. I have just requested from the assessor a list of the top 100 commercial property taxpayers, so we can see who will be the biggest beneficiary of this tax program. That request has been made. I have a question for the finance team. It creates a new board of trustees. Does this conflict then with the new board of trustees for the municipal trust that we've just created? And are we paying these trustees? And are we suddenly going to have now two separate investment policy tracks within the municipality? I strongly have issues with the double sales tax, but it's great that we now have this on the record. So the payers who are already paying sales tax in the municipality are now on notice. I have strong concerns about the exemption on the expensive purchases. You know, I understand the rationale, but it seems like we're exempting substantial wealth transactions, but not the daily transactions that people have to make. So I think my question at this time is around that board and how it would function in relationship to our overall investment strategy.
Assistant Municipal Attorney Ben Bowman, to the chair. The AO as drafted does not have as much distinction and definition of the board. I don't anticipate that there would be a conflict between the existing trustee board and this new proposed trustee board. It would just be two independent entities that are working on similar topics, but are not inherently at conflict with each other. It may result in disparate investment guidance and policies.
That's fair enough. That just, we're creating a new second investment board for the municipality after we just created the last one. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Schultz.
So we're, just so you know, we're open to, if you want to make it the same board, that's fine. Really want the administration to figure out how best to implement that piece.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. I have several questions. I won't ask them all at once. And I do share a lot of the concerns that Mr. Constant raised. I have also requested that list of property owners, so that can be made available. I guess I'll have two questions for now. One is, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit. What's the rationale for having the administration cost out of the dedicated revenue versus the property tax relief? Because it looked like it takes 10 million out of the dedicated project. So it seems like that's counter to the goal of having enough money as possible to build those things.
I would say in my mind, that was just prioritizing property tax relief.
Okay, and I guess the question would be, are the sponsors or the group open to shifting that into under the cap?
I personally would be.
Yeah, I think just to note, that's something that it's, thanks for sharing your relative priorities there. Other question, well, I guess I'll say on the board as well, I think thinking about who's going to staff that should be incorporated in the administration costs if it's not already. And I say that because the ACE fund, we had a lot of discussion and no one had contemplated at that time the amount that would need to be taken out for administration of the tax, which is bigger, in this case, more staff, but also thinking about the staffing needed to support that board, especially given all of the functions that it's given. And that was, I think, why the ACE Fund folks landed on an executive director. I'm not at all arguing that's the right move, but to think about the staff support for the board to do the functions that it's given if the board members themselves are volunteers, basically. Anyway, so that's just a thought there. On the cap, I want to come back to that as well, the $1,000 cap. I recall that the rationale for that was shared last time was this is what other cities have now, or boroughs, maybe if it was Kenai and those guys. I'm just curious kind of what year those were set, because I do share the concerns that it's way too low for the equity considerations that Mr. Constant mentioned, but also I don't want to design policy on 15 or 20-year-old tax schemes that have not been updated. And I mean scheme in the sense of like a system. So I just putting that out there, but I would love to see what that should look like, not just what other cities are doing.
Yeah, I would say this is what we put out a variety of ranges, and this is what the data honed in on that citizens approved or liked. And to me, one of the reasons for having this, if you're going to go buy a new car, I don't want you driving to the valley to buy the car, driving elsewhere to buy that car. So I also don't want to be a barrier to where we see those purchases leave the municipality.
Thank you. Ms. Branca.
So keeping on that same thread, I don't know what Kenai Peninsula boroughs in excess of prices, but I did see that Kenai Peninsula Borough, where you're saying this would be $300 max on a purchase, Kenai Peninsula Boroughs is $500. So, I think I heard that only on the first 1,000, so that would be $300 max on a purchase. Did I hear that wrong?
30.
$30 max on a purchase. So Kenai Peninsula Borough, I think I'm seeing it's $500 max on a purchase. And I may be wrong on that, but that's a quick Google search on things. And I would say we could be at least as in line with them. I mean, I don't think our Anchorage, it should be less than that. So if we could do a really deep dive, I imagine, Jenna, have you looked at Wasilla and, go ahead.
So if I could jump in, Mr. Chairman, clarify something. In this AO, the cap is on the first $1,000 of a purchase, which means that if it's 3% of 1,000, it would be $30 is how much could be taxed, but $1,000 is the transaction amount. The Kenai Peninsula has a $500 cap on transactions, which means that the most you'd pay on sales tax would be $15.
Oh, okay. Thanks for clarifying that. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask, so Member Rivera talked about poverty level and exempting them from it. Do you still anticipate they would pay the tax though if they were buying alcohol or marijuana? Or are you saying poverty level shouldn't have to pay any tax on those things?
Yeah, thanks. So, so the way that, I guess, first thing, the hardship relief is in there mainly as concept for us to flesh out later, but generally speaking, exempt from provisions of the sales tax period.
Are you done? No, go ahead.
If I may,
Oh, my final one, I think I heard Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, we would exempt. But I'm thinking of larger, like the holiday bazaars coming up and, those are big, small business type things. So I'm wondering what you anticipate for something like that.
I'd have to recall, but I don't believe they're exempt.
Through the chair, those vendors would not be exempt. There are exemptions for kind of like incidental sales, like private party sales, where people do very small volumes incidentally, like on Facebook Marketplace, stuff like that. But I don't think the smaller vendors are exempt.
So, Dean, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to add to that discussion about the maximum amount that's subject to the tax. And there was, I think, reference to the Kenai Peninsula Bureau's $500 maximum per transaction. But closer to us is the Matsu Bureau and also the city of Wasilla. They both have a maximum amount as well. And I'm sorry, I forget which one is 1,000, one is 500. And so I think the 1,000 cap is similar to what's closer to us, the Matsu Bureau.
Do you know if those are compounded taxes or if in Wasilla you only pay the Wasilla tax, or if in Wasilla you pay both the Wasilla and the borough tax,
I'm not quite certain.
which would be a $1,500.
Mr. Kluda, I think, might.
Mr. Chairman, there's no borough-wide sales tax in the Matsu Valley. There are certain specific excise taxes, but both Palmer and Wasilla have sales taxes of their own.
So it's Palmer and Wasilla, not Matsu. Okay, thank you. So I had my question. I'm going to start with the hardship exemption. How does one imagine that's going to work? Like, what would that be? Every purchase that the individuals make, then they have to submit some kind of a reimbursement at the end of the year. Is that what we're thinking here? Some kind of a card that they show that would give them a blanket exemption on the front end. What's that going to look like?
I'll jump in. That's probably why we left it open. There's examples out there of having cards, of applying for a rebate, and it's complicated.
Right.
So
It's not realistic, in my
That-
opinion.
we wanted to leave the option, but
It
It's
just, when I think about my neighbors who are struggling, they have to choose to buy shoes or food. They have to work 16 hours a day, 20 hours a day to keep the power on for their kids as their kids are going to school. And no one's there at home. These folks are not itemizing their taxes. And so the folks who itemize their taxes are the ones who already have the benefit of exceeding the standard deduction, which is over $10,000 in taxes, or 12,000, whatever that is at this point, with all of the property benefits that are included in that on your federal taxes. So nobody in the category of hardship exemption, or very few of them, likely would be in a position to itemize and then seek a reimbursement. So it feels like a paper cutout of a thing, not a thing itself. Okay, so that's probably, I'll stop there. Ms. Braga, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Couple more questions.
Probably, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Couple more questions also on the exemptions. I guess, have you or did you consider exempting food, period, rather than non-prepared food? I say that because in the old times, the assumption was that eating out was a luxury, and I think that was true probably up to the maybe in the 90s or so. I think what's true now is, especially low income folks, often are mostly buying prepared food because it is simply a matter of time. You can't, if you have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, you don't have time to prepare food at home, so you're driving through McDonald's, right? Just as an example. So I think so I just want to make sure that we interrogate that assumption that non-prepared foods is what everybody is doing, and what people at different socioeconomic levels are consuming. So I wonder if that's been a discussion, but I just want to put that on the table because I think that's something that's changed about sales taxes over time. And then also I want to ask if we've really looked at closing loopholes. Because I think the point about exempting things like Facebook Marketplace, are we going to see businesses basically setting up a de facto, like we do sometimes see with garage sales? You know, you have a garage sale at a property every single weekend, every year, right? So it's not a garage sale at that point. It's a unregulated business. So I just want to put that out there because I think not just this, but there's a lot of kind of loophole behavior or avoidance behavior that you have to think about with taxes. And I see our tax folks nodding vigorously back there. So I just want to raise that one as an example, but just if there's other thoughts about what that looks like. And I think the prepared versus non-prepared foods is something we have to really think hard about. Thanks.
Okay, I'll address the loopholes first and maybe throw it to Nolan maybe for the prepared foods. I can't remember if we surveyed that portion of it. Loopholes, yes, agree. And we obviously want, if it's a very small minority, it's probably not worth addressing, but that's why we put back in the ability to modify the exemptions to close those loopholes. We tried to capture everything we could forecast, but once it gets out there, people get creative, as you know. And then on all foods, I can't remember if we looked at non-prepared versus prepared. I know we definitely looked at prepared, and what that means. And it's all math. So if we exempt it, what does that mean for the generation and the relief? So I don't know if anyone over there wants to take a stab at that one.
And I'll just say while they're looking to, I know it's not easy, right? One choice is to tax all food, which has implications. The other is to tax no food, right? So I know it's not easy, but I think, again, I just think we have to think about who's buying what.
So if I may, specific to your question on that loophole on Facebook Marketplace, on page 19 of the ordinance, number 8, so top of the page, I believe that's the provision that mirrors that bullet point. And so really it's imagining isolated sales by one individual to another individual. And so I think that's how it was crafted to not do what you were worrying about.
Right, so I am going to now raise the kind of specter of this oversight board. We're now in the habit of creating new oversight boards with every proposal we're putting forward. We have a marijuana one, there was a proposal for the alcohol group to have one in their strategic plan, and now this. It feels like we are creating all manner of third-party government structures to essentially move out of the assembly, move out of the municipality, the role of oversight of these things. And I am starting to wonder about the value of these things because we have in the ACE board, we just saw their proposal today for almost a $600,000 budget for their oversight process on a $5 million tax. And it might seem reasonable at that level when you think, oh, it's about 10%. That seems fine for administration, but that doesn't actually account for administration because the administration of the marijuana tax is done by the tax division and all the expenses that are relating to that aren't paid for in the same way. And so I'm wondering at what point, and we don't know if that's a paid board, same to the investment board. And so I think there's a lot of information that we need to understand. I have lots of questions about how that's supposed to be because we're more and more granting away the responsibility and right to do those things. So I do have a question. If you wanted to answer, Glenn, that's fine. But I do have a question for the administration. Is it the administration's posture that you are supporting this proposal?
Mr. Chairman, we are supportive of having a dialogue about sales taxes and about future ways to invest in ourselves and ways to revitalize Anchorage. We're not specifically endorsing this proposal at this time, no.
Thank you.
And Chair, I just would add on to the oversight board. That's a component we borrowed from the OKC Oklahoma City model. It's meant to bring citizen involvement, rebuild trust, remove workload from the assembly. But honestly, I'm not tied to it. I mean, if we want to strike it out entirely, it certainly simplifies things, and maybe strike it out and leave the ability to put one back in if you want.
What's in the charter is in the charter. So Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Yeah, another question, and I appreciate the question about kind of timeline of where this goes as well. On the projects, I think there's a lot of great ideas there. I think also it's challenging to think about, or we should be thinking about who owns these facilities, who operates them, and who builds them. And I think a lot of the examples were really good, but I would be curious what the actual, I guess, ownership or fund stack of those, how they got built. And like, for example, a food hall or some of these things that I think could be completely owned by the city, operated by the city with those vendors in them, and also could be private ventures that have created a public space, right? They're a nice thing to have. And I think we need to think about kind of what the role of the city is there. Because, for example, are these supposed to be profitable ventures? Then we should be looking not just at a construction plan, but a business plan, essentially. Like, are they supposed to pay for themselves? And I know that the convention was assumed to not pay for itself because often they don't. And then we ended up with a lot more money than we anticipated, which is a good problem to have, right? Or a good situation to have. And I think about a lot of other entertainment venues that are, purchased or built with sports teams, right? Or which often have an individual owner. And we're not talking about that here, but I think just to put on the table, we should really be thinking about what we are building and what economic activity we're expecting to happen, because a lot of places those are at best public-private partnerships, or they are completely private real estate investment and or operations. And so I think there's a world where we could get these built and we're not necessarily assuming ownership of, the Nordic Aquatic Center, for example, but who would run that? I think that those things need to be interrogated. So I think as we're looking at the projects, it shouldn't just be what is the cost to build. It is what is the business plan for this thing for the next 20 years? Because I think otherwise we would risk building things like the grain terminals in Valdez or Matanuska Made, right? This state has a history of building things with state money that are supposed to be private ventures and don't happen. And so I just want to be cautious before we put that out in the public as well. So anyway, I don't know if you guys have thoughts about what that would look like, or how you imagine these being operated. Maybe just pick an example. I know you're early stages, but I think we just need to be thinking about what the city is taking on versus what the community as a large would have as a facility.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I don't want to fund private developments. What I'd like to see is that amenity drives private development around it. The Ship Creek, let's say park complex. I'd like to see that revitalize businesses around Ship Creek. So it encourages them, like any improvement quarter, to put more money in. So ideal scenario, we put in $60-50 million in the projects, and the community invest much more than that over time.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just add too, very briefly, because what it really does is it catalyzes real estate investment because it increases the value of that area. And so I think if we could see examples from other cities, not just what it looks like, but also some indication of whether it was public or private partnership, and whether it was a catalyst project that then drove an entire neighborhood to develop, or if it was really private investment that then catalyzed itself. I think that it's just understanding, so we're comparing apples to apples, would be super helpful. A little more detail on that. Thanks.
So it was just stated that we're in the early stages. How are we in the early stages if we're less than 4 weeks away from when the sponsors intend to have this thing pass or heard? I don't know how to answer that question truthfully. So we are not in the early stages. This is careening towards the intended date of passage. So others have questions or input? Ms. Bronca, go ahead.
Yep. I was thinking about projects also, and I feel like it'd be really hard to vote for this without knowing which project. On the 6th of November, will you have it? The project will be chosen by then. I mean, that'd make a big difference in my mind and then the other thing is, I hate to keep harping on it, but I easily purchase items in Soldotna, and it's a 6% tax. So maybe the confusion is, Soldotna has 3%, Kenai Peninsula Borough lops another 3% on it, and it's 6%. And I don't think that would be that onerous to have that higher level. I'm kind of getting caught still in this poverty level, being able to purchase items that are not good for you. And would love to see, so I guess maybe you think alcohol, tobacco or marijuana are okay. But if they're poverty level, and they want to buy those things, I don't see a problem with paying a tax for that. And then I just, am thinking, I was at the Umoja co-working and the difficulties small businesses are having. And it would be really nice to in some way, exempt the purchases of the small Alaskan businesses that are the cottage industries that are trying to make a go of it here in Anchorage. And, you know, they're up against higher costs to bring materials in for their product, and shipping is high. So if there was a way to look at that, that could be pretty interesting. So thanks.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll just jump on the timeline. We have a proposed timeline. Obviously, the goal is to get it on the April ballot. So rough estimation, we have 90 days to work this. And that's the goal. If it doesn't make it, then I guess we have a year. So.
All right, thank you. That is a more rational timeline, considering where we are right now. Mr. Littlefield.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick question. I looked at the project list. Do we have a dollar figure for each one of these? Because at $50 million a year for the next 7 years, I think we're overvaluing our projects for the amount of money we're going to take in. I don't know if we're going to be able to finish all these projects. But if we have a dollar figure for each one of these, then it's quite possibly we're never going to meet the goal.
Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, so I don't have the direct answer to that question, but I will say one of the things that we hope to do is have a future work session that's dedicated to the project so that we can go into the details. I think today and perhaps the first maybe couple of work sessions, we're hoping to focus on the mechanics and then in the future pivot to projects. But it's a good question though.
So, Mr. Littlefield, yesterday I had a briefing with the administration and the advocate organization, and their message was that they're continuing to do cost analysis on the top 10 projects right now. And it's likely that a smaller slate of projects would be selected. In particular, what's challenging is the trust exercise to cover cost of maintenance and operations is tricky to assess because the projects have different scales of need. If it's a park that has fewer public services, then it has a lower level of need for revenues off of some form of trust versus a swim place that has massive staff and lifeguards and all the needs that would have to be embedded in it. And so that conversation, I'm told, is what's happening for them right now.
I have another quick one. Yep. And to piggyback on Member Brawley, the administration costs right now is being fronted by the 1%, which will reduce the amount of money that we use for projects. And I think there was open to flipping it back the other side. Maybe both sides should be onus to the administration cost because it's both funding the project. So I don't know if it could be a split thing or not. One side or another shouldn't pay for the whole bill. It's my view.
Chair.
Go ahead.
I think some recapped, member Constant or Chair recapped the project. So the costing committee is working on those projects. So this will be a recommended slate, which then the board or the assembly, ultimately will decide which projects are funded at a point and move forward. So they may not all move forward if we don't get the funding. Ideal scenario is the funding comes in for all of them, and you have to repeat the process in the future to figure out what's next.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention one point that came up in conversation regarding the 80% funding for a project before it could go forward, is that this isn't necessarily need to entirely come from the 1% sales tax in its trust fund. There could be grants or some other money that's also part of the project, but totality and 80% before, I guess, the project would go forward. So just to point out that it's not entirely out of the 50 million per year from the 1% tax. It could be from other, depending on the project. And whether there's other funding sources for them, we don't want to restrict them and exclude other funding sources.
Thank you. I'll go with the question, Glenn. How many staff are you going to need to implement such a project?
Well, as it's defined now, Mr. Chair, we would see a doubling of Treasury. We currently have 28 employees. If this was to go according to the AO, the version we currently have, we would see an additional 28 employees required.
So just using baseline assumptions off the top of your head, recognizing you could be inaccurate because I'm asking you information I didn't ask you to bring, what would that budget be?
By the definitions and the structure that we're looking at in the AO, when we're fully engaged, like year 28, fiscal 28, that number would be about 4 million annually
4 million annually.
in
Okay.
administrative costs.
And that gets to the point of who pays, right? Because part of it will be the collection, but there's also going to be exemptions. There's going to be managing kind of on the tax side, like the real estate side. It seems like it's a pretty complex set of circumstances. Are you currently fully staffed?
Yes, we are.
Thanks. Mr. Salt.
I got a question. So are there things that can be done to reduce that staff need?
Well, the numbers were drawn from our actual experience with the revenue streams we're servicing now. So unless, we engage in automation, AI, things like that, which are very long-term projects, the numbers we have here, I think, would be a good guide going forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions, anyone? I think we have approximately 6 minutes. 7 minutes. Anyone else? Ms. Bronca.
Yeah, so I know the ordinance will be out there, I guess, from the sponsors and ADC, and I know the ask was for all members to share, information as we've heard it. I know there's just a lot of appetite in the public to have more discussion about this. There's a lot of feelings about it that we've all heard, I think. So I just wonder kind of what is the additional public outreach now that the ordinance is out? Obviously, there's public hearing, right? But what is your guys' kind of outreach plan going forward? Thanks.
So there's been a lot of presentations at community councils, but now the ordinance is out. So I have already sent it to my community councils asking for feedback. We're doing it this way, trying to introduce it before it's actually introduced to avoid multiple amendments, and we won't be able to avoid an S version. I don't see that happening. But that's our goal. We have 90 days to get that S version coming forward and through the body.
And I guess I'm going to spin the question on you, Member Brawley. What kind of community outreach would you like to see?
I think there just needs to be, maybe it is now that the ordinance is out. I think people just need a conduit to share their comments, and it hasn't been clear. Obviously, ADC, you guys did a great job asking for projects, but I think people felt like they wanted to give feedback on the actual thing. So I think as long as we're communicating where that should go, whether it's email assembly members, email the sponsors, right? Like where do we want people to direct their energy? So I don't have so much a specific plan, just I think we just need a really clear answer to that question, and maybe the ordinance is that answer, but.
Yeah, I would say at this time, since there is an ordinance that should hopefully be on an agenda soon, that the appropriate avenue is this is now an assembly process, and doesn't mean we're not going to work with the coalition that brought us to this point, but this is an assembly process now.
And so to that end, I think we could talk with legislative services to put up a special page with the details and the documents and maybe a form to submit communications that can be aggregated and shared. So I'll talk with legislative services and see if they have that capacity at this time. Other members, last minutes? All right.
Yeah, Chris, I was trying to get in the queue.
Sorry,
Zach.
I didn't see that. Mr. Johnson, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. So I heard the administration say they weren't specifically endorsing this proposal, but mentioned interest in, I think you said property tax relief and revenue diversification. Is there anything else you're looking at currently? Any other ideas in the works besides this one?
Through the chair, Member Johnson, we, no major proposals in the works at this present time, no, but we definitely like the idea of this kind of a dialogue taking place, and we want these types of work sessions to take place and to flesh out a lot of key aspects of a proposal and what this proposal and other kinds of opportunities that may come down the line. So we are very open to dialogue on the subject of revenues and other kinds of ways of improving our community, but nothing specific to report on at this point.
I think though, I would just offer that the budget as presented has 2 lines in it that speak to a fleet levy. And so, is the administration now stepping back from that proposal in the budget?
Mr. Chair, no, we are not backing down from our proposed budget and those levy items, no.
Okay, so I think that was part of Mr. Johnson's question maybe, was are there other matters in terms of revenue that the administration is looking at right now? And so you said no, but I just want to make sure the record is clear. The administration has put forward a budget that has 2 levies in it. And now we heard they're not rescinding that for at least conversation over the process of our budget. I think, Mr. Johnson, that might be, if I was hearing you right, what you were asking about to some degree. Mr. Rivera?
Certainly could be part of it. So I appreciate you specifically asking that question there, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to, sorry to put you on the spot, Nolan, but just want to interrogate, because I don't want this to be misinterpreted. So at this point, the administration isn't rejecting this proposal, correct?
Through the chair, correct. We're not standing in opposition to this. We are supportive of the dialogue taking place and not making an endorsement about it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap up here. We're at the end. Spend an hour. I'm sure we'll have some more time. Opportunities for work sessions are slim between now and the 19th of November because of the budget process. It's eaten up most of those times, but I'm sure we can find an hour here or there. So be judicious in the request and very targeted about the information you're seeking to present. With that, we'll be adjourned and convene back in 10 minutes. Next work session.